Good morning and welcome to the Alliance to Save Energy's Fireside Chat. This is on the importance of leveraging public-private relationships to champion energy efficiency in cities. This is part of the EE Global webinar series, and I encourage everyone who's tuned in to ask questions through the Q&A portal. And I'll remind you during this Q&A to fire through some questions, and we can see if we can draw some great answers out of our two amazing speakers today. So we have Bill Finch and Chris Castro. First up is Bill Finch. Bill served as mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut for 8 years after coming and serving in the Connecticut Senate for 7 years. These feel like prison terms, Bill. He was known for strong, environmentally friendly policies and tax reforms, both of which receiving local and national praise. Bill, federal policies being gridlocked, city-level regulation is more important than ever. Mayors are scaling up energy efficiency projects. I would welcome your introductory thoughts. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Martin. You know, we joke about it. It's you're in purgatory, or it's a sentence, but it really is the most gratifying job you could ever have in American politics, is to be an American mayor. And I assume it's a lot the same in the UK and France and other places, because mayors with a quick shot can really get things moving and get things going in the right direction. Just to review a little bit about what we did in Bridgeport, was modeled a lot after what Mike Bloomberg did in New York. We're only 55 miles from New York City, heavily influenced by the New York City real estate market as well as the media market. And so we learned quickly about Plan YC, and we started on our own journey. It was called Be Green 2020. We got about 150 people involved in the community, in the region, to put together a plan. I'm not big on plans because they tend to be sitting on shelves things, but this really was a great spark that initiated probably about $1 billion of investment during the Great Recession in terms of public and private investment in the city. And it was really there because we had a sustainability plan. I had 2 or 3 developers, major developers, who are now still building things in the city that started in our 8 years, come to me and say, we're disinvesting in Miami Beach, we're disinvesting in other areas on coastal Jersey, and we're going to invest in Bridgeport because you have a sustainability plan and you're working on mitigation and you're working on resilience. And I thought they were kidding me. You know, I thought they were just pulling my leg, but they were serious, and they're spending tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars collectively in investment in real estate and in economic development projects in the city of Bridgeport and energy projects. So as a result of this plan, we got lots of recognition. We were able to build the largest fuel cell still in North America. It's 15 megawatts, 3 other fuel cells, cover the dump with photovoltaic, change the street lights, make walkable walkable paths, bike paths, and walking throughout the city. A lot of projects that really reduced. So because we got a very elemental approach, we started by getting ICLEI to calculate our greenhouse gas emissions. And we found out that the city was, and as most cities will find, they're only about 5 or 4% of the overall greenhouse gases generated within their boundaries. So our plan wasn't about getting the city government green. It was about getting the entire city within the boundaries green. Major difference. And the reason why I think it's so critically important for us to work with cities is they can react quickly. They have funding. They're already spending money on sewer separation. They're already spending money on energy conservation. They're spending money on the summer jobs. They're spending money on a lot of things that could be directed toward things that reduce our greenhouse gases. And every time we make a city more efficient, more livable, more affordable, we bring people to live in a city. To me, density, the distance we move electrons, the distance that we move heat, the distance that we move people, the distance that we turn rubber wheels and the like, are all things that if the distance is shorter, we are using less fossil fuel or other energy sources, and we're emitting fewer greenhouse gases. So I like to say that, you know, filling a pothole efficiently or lending a library book efficiently makes the city more economically viable, reduces the cost of living there, increases the quality of life, and increases density, which thereby reduces greenhouse gas emissions and climate. So after we did our plan, we had a lot of things happen. And I just would mention one thing that's not the biggest thing we did, but I think might have had the longest impact because it was like a pebble being thrown into a pond and creating ripples. We created a Mayor's Conservation Corps, and we trained each summer about 100 kids, inner city kids that are totally nature deficit, raised in a nature deficit. And we trained them in recycling and solar energy, energy conservation, and wildlife and things like that. So some of them went to some of our more fragile parks where we have endangered species and things like that, and they were wildlife guards. Others did soil conservation projects, but the bulk of them went door to door. They got people to get an extra recycling bin if they were filling up one. We got them to sign up with Posigen, who helped fund our summer jobs program, to have an assessment for solar energy. As I mentioned, they're up on my roof today putting solar energy in. Good timing. I couldn't have planned it better. And so they went door to door. They reached about 30,000 households, and every summer with a nice jersey and khaki pants and a clipboard, they were telling people how to save conserve energy in their home, and then get solar on their roof, how to recycle, how to get a free rain barrel from the city to divert stormwater from the sewers, how to get a free tree. We paid for our snow shelves. The distance between the sidewalk and the street in many cities are very narrow, especially in the Northeast, and they don't support large trees without breaking the sidewalk up. So if you just simply move them onto the private lawns where there's plenty of room for the roots, and you have a right tree, right place policy, so that on the side of the street where there's above ground wires, you plant small serviceberries and dogwoods, and on the other side, you plant oaks and poplars. This was something very popular. We planted thousands of trees this way, just by thinking a little differently and saying, you know what? Okay, it's a publicly sponsored tree, but the homeowner can help us. And they actually helped us plant the trees, and they actually signed an adoption paper. I adopt this tree, and I will water it so many times a week, and I will trim it, and I will keep my cats out of it or whatever. So it was something that really changed people's thoughts and changed people's behaviors. And I think had one story comes to mind. This one kid left the city of Bridgeport, went off because of his exposure to this, got a fisheries degree. Now, this is an inner city kid, went to an inner city high school, gets a fisheries degree, and comes back to work for me because he wanted to help us open up this barrier island park called Pleasure Beach, which we did. And it was just such a wonderful story that I think it probably was many kids like that we reached. But I always remember this guy, James Stevenson, because he came back and helped us make Bridgeport greener, helped us fight climate change. And it was because of those early seeds that we planted. So, we get despondent, we get frustrated. There's not enough money. There is money in the cities, it needs to be redirected. There is energy, there is enthusiasm. You're going to hear from Buddy Dyer's guy down in Orlando, and he's one of the most enthusiastic mayors out there. And there's a way to get to this reducing our greenhouse gas emissions that I think mayors are the most uniquely situated to do. So that's where my head is at, and I'm pretty optimistic about how we can handle this, especially if the more we work with mayors and governors.
That's great, and shortly I will drill into that optimism a little bit and see. And I do commend you for putting solar on your roof, so we'll forgive any banging noises that we hear through this. Let me now introduce Chris Castro. Chris is the Sustainability Director for the City of Orlando. He oversees Mayor Buddy Dyer's vision to be one of the most environmentally friendly cities in the country. Ambitious goals of 100% renewable energy on city operations by 2030. And also you are fully in line with the Paris Agreement goals for the whole city, so by 2050. Chris, as a freshman at the University of Central Florida, you pushed UCF as a carbon neutral campus by 2050, which at that time the president endorsed, and I understand that those programs are still in place today. Given how long ago that must have been, I'm kidding, given how long ago that must have been, but you understood back then the way to attack a problem from multiple angles. So I really welcome your introductory thoughts. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. I really appreciate it. And it's really refreshing to be on a panel with Mayor Finch, who truly understands the opportunity that we have to address climate, but also improve quality of life and our communities at large. Thank you for your leadership on that, Mayor Finch.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I have the honor and privilege of serving here in the city of Orlando as the senior advisor to our mayor, Buddy Dyer, and the director of our Office of Sustainability and Resilience. And before I dive into that, I do want to quickly take a step back about my journey as a student. But the interesting thing about that story and how serendipitous it is that I'm on a panel with Mayor Finch is that I ended up coming out of that commitment of our UCF president, wanting to become carbon neutral by 2050. And I was empowered to do something more than just setting that pledge. And I pulled together a group of students at my university, some friends and peers, and we created a nonprofit organization called Ideas for Us. And it intended to be a student group at my university focused on accelerating sustainability. And what ended up happening is it became a quintessential grassroots movement. And we started to scale ideas to different universities around the country. And guess where it ended up? Bridgeport, Connecticut. And James Robinson, Jacob Robinson, was our director out there in Bridgeport, and ended up getting a position in the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I believe is the same person you're talking about, Mayor Finch. So there is a very small world there in terms of where we came from, and it's amazing to see that full circle. I've been here at the city of Orlando now for 6.5 years, leading our climate and sustainability efforts. And Orlando, in addition to the state of Florida, is a gorgeous place, I think, as many of you all know, but it's not a place that comes to mind for most people when you think about leadership in sustainability and climate action, right? You often think of us as a premier sports destination and wonderful entertainment and probably Mickey Mouse and fire-breathing dragons, and yeah, we have those things. But I'm here to really share a completely different side of the city that a lot of people don't get to hear about. And Greenworks Orlando is one of those reasons. Mayor Dyer, early on in his administration, launched this effort, Greenworks Orlando, with a focus on making bold and daring moves to transition us to be more environmentally friendly, more socially inclusive and equitable, and be a 21st century vibrant economy, one that focuses on the green industries. And similar to Bridgeport, we developed a municipal sustainability plan and a community sustainability plan that I outlined goals and strategies and key indicators that we can measure success over time, and it's been critical. Being in a state where climate change historically has been actually a term, that can't be used in any state or formal documentation. It's been looked down upon by the state legislature. And, you question that because we are what many people call us is ground zero for climate change impacts, not just sea level rise and storm surges, but extreme weather events, saltwater intrusion to drinking water supply, extreme heat that we're witnessing. And so we realized that climate action is absolutely imperative back to the health and well-being of our residents, the quality of life, and of course, our environmental protection. So we became early signatories of the Global Covenant of Mayors and the Under 2 MOU. We sit on the current steering committee for the Climate Mayors Network here in the United States, and part of more than a dozen other networks in city governments and local governments such as ICLEI and USDN working to advance these solutions. Ultimately, I wanted to just touch on, as I close here, on a couple of things that may paint the picture, and we could dive further into detail, Martin. But ultimately, this Greenworks initiative has, the way that I explain it, we've become this internal sustainability and resiliency consulting firm. My role is to support every city department and function, as well as looking externally to support our utility, transit authority, airport, schools, and universities, all the way down to our residents, in helping us to make the switch towards sustainability. So what does that look like? Well, we've focused heavily on ramping up building energy efficiency. We implemented over a $20 million municipal green bond to retrofit city buildings, enabling policies that require commercial buildings to benchmark and report their energy and carbon footprints, enabling clean energy financing like the PACE programs, Property Assessed Clean Energy, and so on and so forth. So on the demand side, really focused on efficiency. On the supply side, we have a municipal electric and water utility, OUC. And in partnership with this utility, we are working on rapidly decarbonizing our utility and scaling up renewables. not only are we doing rooftop solar projects on city buildings, but we're actually looking at covering parking lots and doing many of those parking solar canopies. We're ground mounting large utility systems. We're hosting community solar co-ops for our residents to get more affordable solar. And uniquely, Orlando is helping to pioneer a new application for solar, and that's photovoltaics, floating solar on retention pond water bodies. And we have over 1 megawatt of floating solar surrounding Orlando. It's incredible. Vehicle electrification is a high priority, switching not only the city's fleet vehicles, but all public transportation to electric and alternative fuel by 2030. Expanding public infrastructure for charging stations, and even ramping up some creative behavioral programs for electric vehicles. One we're launching this month is an electrified dealership program where we're literally providing financial incentives to car dealerships and sales reps at those dealers to sell EVs. And this is becoming a huge wave to ramp up the adoption. And last but not least, I can't forget about natural climate solutions. And I'm really excited that Mayor Finch mentioned your tree programs and what you're doing to get people outdoors and planting trees. We also have robust goals around urban forestry and reforestation. We want to see a 40% tree canopy by the year 2040 from a bird's eye view in Orlando.
Wow.
And so we're ramping up. Every year, thousands of trees are given out to residents. We're planting down street trees, private property, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, we're all in on this movement, and it's not all in just for the environment, but we really see this as a triple bottom line economic development strategy focused on people, planet, and our collective prosperity. And back to the notion of the topic of this conversation, it cannot happen without partnerships and collaborations, whether that's public and public between the city and our municipal utility, or public and private. And we have several examples of how we've worked with the private sector to accelerate our climate and sustainability action. So looking forward to diving in further.
Super, thank you very much. The couple of thoughts. The UK government, and as you can hear from the UK, they announced a very big energy efficiency program, national program, to put as much insulation, good basic insulation, also other obviously technical measures, but the focus very much on green jobs, getting people's energy bills down at a time where there's a big fear of a recession coming, tough economy. What do you think, and this is a question to both of you, but perhaps Bill, what are your thoughts on how US cities can really focus? Where's their single focus got to be right now in order to protect the livelihoods of Americans?
Well, there's so many things we need to do to change our behaviors and reduce our carbon and methane emissions. But I think that the biggest thing mayors can do, especially in what cities can do, is they can make this relevant to people's lives. Things like COVID come along and they distract us from climate change. Things like taxes come along, things like elections come along and they distract us. I think, I had a candidate who I was coaching once tell me that in the inner city of her city, climate change didn't resonate. And I said, well, that's funny. I said, it resonated in mine because I was able to talk about Aunt Millie's basement flooding, Uncle Joe not having a job, and the light bill being too high, and the air not being clean, and the beaches being closed. And all of a sudden, oh, I get it. That's climate change. And so I think, one of the things that mayors need to focus on, I think, is they really need to create the conversation and bring it home. I think something like the Mayor's Conservation Corps, something like you're doing in Orlando, where you really bring home the message to people. You bring climate change to the kitchen table. You don't talk about penguins and polar bears. You talk about your light bill, your basement flooding, you're not in Florida not having fresh potable water and the salt water rising within the inland water tables. You talk about how to afford the tank of gas. Well, maybe you don't need a tank of gas anymore. Maybe you could have $1 per gallon equivalent with an electric vehicle if we can figure out a way to make that more affordable for you. I really love the idea they're doing in Orlando about incenting car dealers. In Connecticut, unfortunately, we're one of only 5 states that doesn't allow Teslas to be sold in Connecticut. It's very embarrassing. We think we're very enlightened. You know, we've got Yale and all that, but yet we let car dealers who sponsor Little League teams determine the legislative agenda. It's very embarrassing. But at some point, it's going to change. People can go to Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New York and easily get Teslas, but it's just so sort of stupid and symbolic of how special interest can really put a chit in and call it. But I think the one thing that we need to do is keep the conversation going, keep it relevant, and keep action going, and direct our spending toward things that, Chris said a very important thing. In making our plan in Bridgeport, we had the triple bottom line. So when our Be Green committees came up with 200 policies, we couldn't possibly do 200 policies, and some of them weren't as good as others. We rated them based on, it had to save money for the city, number one. That was number one. We weren't going to do if it didn't save money for the city. It had to create economic opportunity and jobs in the inner city where people needed it desperately. And it had to reduce our greenhouse gases. If it did all of those three things, we had we hit a triple every time we were up at bat. And we got millions of dollars saved for the city, and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the city, because that was our sieve that we put all of our policies through. Very important.
Isn't this, Chris, isn't this the energy efficiency play? Isn't, this is where you get the bang for the buck?
Yes, very much so. And piggybacking on Mayor Finch, what he was talking about, it very much resonated. I think we have to stop talking about the polar bears and penguins and continue to talk about how this impacts people, right? It's back down to our quality of life and how climate and sustainability, or the lack thereof, are impacting us. We have seen that energy efficiency is one of those topics that cuts across political boundaries and cuts across borders and people's philosophical mindsets. We realize that it is not only the fiscally prudent thing for us to invest in as local government, but it also has these trickle down and cascading benefits of improving indoor environmental quality, improving productivity in the workforce, lowering costs, lowering emissions. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so, yeah, I think that, what we've realized is staying true to energy efficiency and how it provides economic benefits in addition to benefits to our community and to the environment is what's resonating locally. And we're seeing that those across, as I mentioned, cross political spectrums are looking at that as the first fuel that it needs to be, and one to lower operating expenses, increase operating incomes, and at the end of the day, help drive forward a movement that's cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable for our society. And I think that's where we want to start to get to.
Martin, can I add something to that,
please? Yeah, please, yeah.
There's a lot of hand-wringing. Connecticut and many states are going through governor's efforts to reduce carbon. And the first thing all the commissioners get together, I've been at these meetings, we don't have any money. Mayors do have money. They have sewer separation money. They have community development block grant money. They have their budgets. The budgets can be realigned. But the biggest chunk we have is the money that we want to save. We can finance our energy conservation with the money we're not spending, right, Chris? And
correct.
I'll just give you one example. And I'm sure, Chris, you've got bigger numbers because Orlando's a bigger city than Bridgeport. But we don't own our street lights, and we don't have a municipal utility. So we have to sort of go begging to the for-profit utilities and generators. We separate transmission from generation. But we were able to convince our local utility to cut a few years off of their rate base, which is a problem because they put it in their rate base and they want to run it all out. So you have inefficient solar tube lights out there, and you want to get rid of them, and they're still depreciating it and putting it in their rate base. So, but we were able to convince them to change to LED lights, and that one step alone saved us $1 million a year in electric bills. We were saving several $1 million a year. We bought everybody a second blue toter for the recycling. It cost us $1.5 million to buy everybody a second one. And it paid for itself within a year and a half. Yep. Just in the amount of waste we diverted from being burnt at the waste to energy plant. So there's what ties into what great companies like Siemens are doing is that we need the help of the private sector who do that, because if we can do a power purchase agreement, or if we can show the city council how they're going to save money by implementing this expense, that's key. And one last point, and I know I'm rambling here a little bit, but private sector is so important to cities. I looked to the private sector as much or more than I looked to the federal government when I was mayor, because the mayors, United States Conference of Mayors, where Buddy and I met, has all these great companies like Siemens and Philips and all these companies that give you such great tools and give you so many things that you can implement.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Actually, it was leading me to a question. Chris, we worked with you on verifying your big ambitions. We helped model a technology pathway with our city modeling tool. And we concluded that it is achievable, your plan, but it also highlighted the fact that this is not a question of putting a few solar panels in the parking lot or on Bill's roof. But it is an enormous challenge. I mean, you have to cover every open space with solar, and on top of that, you have to think of other energy sources and clever ways of storing, and more importantly, actually the energy efficiency component of actually reducing what we use. How are we going to scale this up? I mean, it's an enormous challenge. Both Bridgeport and Orlando, I mean, these are big cities. How do you envisage scaling this up now to the pace that we need to get to?
Yeah, it's almost unfathomable to think about the transition from the energy that built our world to the energy that's going to shape our future, right? And that's the turning point that we're in, which is super exciting. And by the way, I don't know about you, Martin, but both Bill and I are both solar powered. I have a 10K system on mine, so this particular dialogue is also solar powered and emissions free. But I wanted to first thank you and the Siemens team, because you're right, that citywide performance tool, technology pathways, essentially helped us to identify what technologies we as a city need to ramp up in order to achieve our reduction targets of net zero by 2050. And as you mentioned, the models showed that it is possible with commercially viable technologies to date. Now, how we get there is a lot more complex than just identifying those technologies, right? We have to identify policies and program opportunities to spur the adoption of those items, and then technically working with our electric grid, which is vertically integrated, generation, transmission, and distribution, working with them to turn the entire ship around, considering the sunk cost and the legacy energy that we're powering ourselves with. Today, building on the effort of CYPT, the Siemens study, we are finishing an energy integrated resources plan, a utility scenario planning and forecasting study that incorporated the inputs. And by the way, Siemens is doing that study for us. So you all are helping us to do the very specific modeling and transitioning the electric grid to 100% clean and renewable energy sources by 2050. So how do we get there? Obviously, significantly ramping up utility scale and distributed rooftop solar on rooftops, parking lots, and even floating, as we talked about, is going to be key. We have worked with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and Google, who just released a new tool called the Environmental Insights Explorer, EIE. And for cities that are listening into this fireside chat, I really encourage you to look up the Environmental Insights Explorer. It's now data for over 3,000 cities globally, and helping cities better understand their carbon footprints and their rooftop solar potential. So we did a distributed generation study that looked at how many rooftops, and 92% of rooftops in Orlando are not only theoretically able to add solar, but economically able to add solar as well. So we see a huge opportunity there. We're hosting solar co-ops. I talked about this earlier, but these group buying programs, these solarized campaigns are really effective in getting homeowners to bundle their demand, go out to the market, and essentially achieve a better economy of scale, because now we're buying in bulk with hundreds of homeowners, right? We just added a megawatt of new rooftop solar in less than 1 year in Orlando through the solar co-op model. So working with Solar United Neighbors, the nonprofit, has been amazing to do those. We are also enabling clean energy financing programs, right? We have PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, but there's also low income finance programs that we've lifted up. One of them is a nonprofit called SELF, and it's a community development finance institution that is providing low and sometimes no interest loans to low-income homeowners to make qualified energy improvements. We have to look at streamlining permitting, stretching the building codes. I mean, everything under the sun to really achieve, to your point, the 100% goals. And it's going to take demand side reduction, and it's going to take pretty creative application of renewables and storage and the like. The last thing I will say is we are testing the future of energy storage, in my opinion, is hydrogen. And we're in the process of now testing renewables to hydrogen in order for us to true up the generation of a solar array or a large utilities farm as we have potential cloud cover come over or afternoon storms. And so by producing hydrogen with the excess solar that's being created, storing that hydrogen and then using a fuel cell to create electricity and true up that bell curve, utilities are now going to better be able to monitor and therefore dispatch various energy sources to meet our load and our demand. So we're in the process of testing that lithium ion, hydrogen, flow batteries, and others to figure out what that mix of energy storage is going to need to be to hit the 100%.
If I was still mayor, I'd try to steal this guy away in a heartbeat.
So Bill, how do we scale up? What's your view?
I get back to the soft part of this again, and that's the hearts and minds. We don't have the hearts and minds with everybody we need yet. And I think if you look at the failure of our federal government to even acknowledge that climate change exists, we've got a long way to go in the United States. Mayors have gotten it. And I have to say, I'm a little bit older than most of you guys on the call. And sorry for the clock in the background. I thought I put it on silence. The original environmental movement was started on a bipartisan level. Republican, then Democratic mayor of New York, John Lindsay, was a big part of it. Richard Nixon signed the legislation that created the EPA. The first leaders of the environmental movement in Connecticut at a statewide level were Republicans. So I don't see this as partisan. And I really think one of the worst things that's happened in the last 20 years or so is making this partisan. When I was chair of the climate task force at the Mayor's Council, it was well known to us that the Koch brothers were telling Republican mayors, we're going to run to you and primary you from the right if you acknowledge climate change. That's silly, because there's so much money to be made. We've got Republicans and Democrats all agreeing there's tons of money to be made in this new green economy. So what we really need to do is focus on the hearts and minds. And that's why I looked at the things like the Mayor's Conservation Corps and other things like that. We need to find the money, and we need to make the people want to spend the money. And that link is where mayors and governors come in. And we need, in the process, you make green voters. And whatever party they vote for, I really, I'm a Democrat, but I don't really care. I want them to vote green. Green money and green jobs, because that's going to lead the discussion. And the federal government will finally come along at some point. We know that. But there was a great thing the federal government did, which was a great tool for Siemens and other companies and cities to work together. And that was EECBG, the Energy Efficiency Community Block Grants. Those all went into retrofitting buildings, it's a revenue stream we've created that the federal government actually invested in creating a revenue stream of savings. That Orlando is saving millions of dollars, Bridgeport saving millions of dollars. And I think the way to scale this up is everybody has to have their oar in the water. Right now, the federal government's treading, but eventually they'll get in the game. Right now, where I think we need to prioritize is getting cities to spend their money in a green way and partnering with private companies like Siemens and others, and good not-for-profits like the one that's put this one together, so that we can get the votes, as well as the will has to be there. And I think the will comes from largely from mayors helping to make green voters and making people conscious of their connection to nature. One of the observations I always try to remind people is we are part of an ecology. We are beings that have to live and die within an ecological system. Unfortunately, our impact on the ecological system we're in is greater than any other organism that's ever been known to the planet. But we have the ability to reason our way and to realize that we're making this impact and to mitigate and to do something about it. And I think it's the hearts and minds.
Yeah, and Mayor Finch, I just wanted to pick something up that you just mentioned that I think is really important to take away. And there are proven models like EECBG that literally, quite frankly, catalyzed the movement of clean energy that we're seeing now in 2020, back in 2010. This last decade of growth and the amount of adoption we've seen at the local level has been because of that. And 2 weeks ago, I was honored to be able to give a congressional testimony to the House Oversight and Reform Committee on climate solutions for local governments. And one of the recommendations I mentioned was to refund and expand EECBG because it truly helped to catalyze the green economy. And as you're mentioning, we're still saving millions of dollars because of the investments that we made. And it helped us to realize the business model of investing an additional 20 million after EECBG in our own municipal green bond to continue retrofitting those buildings in the exact same model and creating a revolving energy fund to pay that bond back over time. And we're now saving over $2 million per year because of that bond capital, investing in what? Energy efficiency, retrofitting lighting, improving controls, retrofitting HVAC, and indoor comfort. And I think those are some really important takeaways that if there are people at the federal level listening in on this, that is a proven model that I think we can revisit and has shown to drive the market.
And one other point, Martin, to answer your question, how to bring this to scale. The fastest way to bring all this to scale is to eliminate the externality, the negative externality of being able to dump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere without paying for it, harming everyone, but not paying. It's the biggest negative externality that we've ever had in our capitalist system. And we rely on the federal government to correct those things when they happen. The biggest thing the federal government could do, whether it's cap and trade or carbon tax, it doesn't matter. Price carbon. And that you'll see huge investment. It's like when Philadelphia started creating their stormwater fee. To avoid the cost of the stormwater fee, people began capturing rainwater and keeping it out of the sewer system. And it went to scale like crazy. So whenever we can eliminate the free riders in our capitalist system and make them pay for what their services that they're getting and eliminate negative externalities, we correct that and bring it to scale faster than anything. So I don't need the federal government to come and tell me how to do this stuff. I don't want them to come and tell Chris and Buddy how to do it in Orlando because the local people know the best. They study it, they live it. What the federal government needs to do is to make sure the economy is working right and not creating all these problems that we're downstream trying to bail as fast as we can, and we don't have the tools that the federal government has.
I mean, it's clear that there are billions of dollars in efficiency savings through lighting and energy, and to reinvest those in further grand scale retrofit programs has got to move us forward a long way. Let me pivot a little bit to electric vehicles. Chris, back in 2008, this was when I was in the mayor's office, electric vehicles were hyped, but subsequently sales were very flat. It's hyped again. Everybody's talking about it. Everyone talks about Tesla and how great they are. Will this growth sustain itself this time? If so, what's changed? What's going to drive this uptake of vehicles?
Well, I think, first of all, we're seeing incredible advancements in technology around battery storage that is beating out the curve that scientists and engineers were expecting to be at here in 2020. And I think that's playing a considerable role. As Mayor Finch mentioned, right now we're less than $1 per gallon equivalent to drive an EV in Florida. It's right around 92 cents a gallon versus a fossil fuel vehicle. And so that's more than 60% less than what's at the pump now, and we're still at historic lows at the pump. So economics, I think, are really driving it, and you're beginning to see huge automakers and corporations go all in, right? VW, Ford, General Motors, are all claiming tens of billions of dollars over the next decade in investment in making electric vehicles the platform of the future. Cities and governments need to still lead by example. And that's why, I always come back to our commitment of putting the flag in the ground and saying, we're going to transition our public fleet and public transportation buses to 100% electric and alternative fuel by 2030. What that has done is created a market driver and assurance in the market that government is moving that way, corporations are moving that way, academia, etc. One of the cool things that mayors are doing in cities is we're beginning to purchase electric vehicles through collaborative arrangements. There's something called the Climate Mayors EV Purchasing Collaborative. And this network, now over 450 mayors in the country have stepped up to uphold the Paris Agreement, about 100 million Americans living within these cities. And we are now starting to purchase climate solutions as a unit and buying EVs. We just brought 40 electric vehicles this last fiscal year through this cooperative buying arrangement with cities around the country. We're also investing, and I think is important for government to look at, in partnership with our utility, investing in public infrastructure. The range anxiety issues for the majority of the public who aren't picking up on the advancements of batteries are still thinking that electric vehicles are not realistic for their day-to-day lives. We know that they've hit a point where it is realistic for the vast majority of our public driving less than 40 miles a day to be able to have an electric vehicle and not have to charge it every day. So we're putting about $1 million of public infrastructure in the ground as we speak. By the end of this year, we'll have more than 100 new level 2 stations at parks and rec centers throughout the city. And in addition, in partnership with our transit authority and electric utility, we are accelerating electric buses. And the challenge around transit with electric buses is these new buses are more expensive than your diesel electrics or CNGs. They're about $250,000 to $300,000 more than a new bus. And so to offset that marginal increase in cost, we've creatively partnered with the utility to offset the upfront cost of that enhanced battery and infrastructure and lease that over the useful life of the bus over an 8-year period so that the transit authority isn't burdened by that upfront enhanced cost, right? Creating a battery as a service model, essentially. This is a public new type of P3 entity, right? Because we have a public utility, but it's really creative, right? The city runs the operations. We underwrite the entire operations. It's a free BRT. Links, our transit authority, runs the buses, and OUC provides that equipment and the power to run them. So these types of creative partnerships are, I think, what's leading to a permanent market of electric vehicles. And I'm hopeful that we're going to see more permanence and growth in that space here in the coming years.
Well, my response to this, and this isn't aimed to be critical, but I know in Shenzhen, China, they have 14,000 buses and 14,000 are electric. And I know in New York, they have 5,800 buses and 10 or 15, I think, are electric. Are we going to catch up? Are we going to get there? I mean, do you think COVID may help bring our streets back with much cleaner transport? Or do you think we're just going to fill them again with the same gas-powered vehicles that we've used?
Well, COVID is a respiratory disease down to its core. And I think it has underscored the challenge of poor air quality, especially communities of color and low income who are disproportionately impacted by COVID in Florida and nationally. And it's just underscoring the inequities that we saw in our communities and the dependence that we had on dirty energy sources that pollute. And so I do think that this is a turning point in underscoring the importance of the clean energy transition, not just for the environment, but from a public health standpoint, and really centering health in that triple bottom line. The health of the environment, the health of the economy, and the health of the people are all interwoven and are needed. And so to get to the scale of what they're doing in China is certainly going to take some type of federal push and goal to make that happen. I don't think locally we can depend on just these creative partnerships to do it at scale. But the low-no emissions grant that is offered by the FTA and USDOT, those have helped us in Orlando accelerate new electric buses. And I think that we need to look at other models to where the federal and the state governments can help accelerate public transportation, knowing that they're going throughout our communities and are impacting directly public health.
I've got a couple of questions. Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
One quick addition to that is, we look at leapfrogging, and I think what COVID has done in terms of distance learning and in terms of work at home is it's leapfrogged us probably a decade in terms of attitude and adjustments. It was rough because it was done so quickly, and humans are pretty resilient, but I think, we were all talking about a lot of these things. And as a mayor who had a school budget, I can tell you that if we could figure out a way to have the kids who can learn in a class of infinite number of students and let them do that, and then focus on the kids who need a class of 4 or 5, we could make education more effective and really more efficient. And I think our failing schools are one of the reasons why we're so slow in the United States to pick up on on climate change, because we have been underperforming for several decades now.
Actually, Bill, you raise a great point. Back in London, we used to give leaflets to the school kids on tips to save energy at home. So they would take these back to their parents. And we did it because this was a very cheap way of delivering a very powerful message back home, right? Through our children. So you clearly subscribe to that idea. Yeah. I've got a couple of questions on Q&A, and we've got about 15 minutes left. Reminder to everybody out there, please fire any questions you have. As you can hear, these are two very astute, very wise people who can pretty much answer anything. So my questions are going to get tougher as well. It's a question here. Bill, you seem to have tapped funding by having a documented plan for addressing the environment. Many cities are having to cut back plans this year due to the economic downturn. Do you have other suggestions for identifying funds for climate mitigation or resiliency projects?
I'm not an alchemist, so I can't create new money, but I can say that the city of Bridgeport's not a big city, and it's a $500 million budget. So if you look in your budget and how you're spending things, you can redirect a lot of the things you're spending, and again, look for the savings. I wouldn't say cities are profligate in their spending, because they're at the bottom of the food chain, but there's still ways that you can change your spending locally, make government more efficient. One of the things I did was a city stat office, which was like what Bloomberg and O'Malley did, and it was to drive efficiencies to be able to get more out of the tax base that we had. Again, that frees up money for other things potentially. And I would also say that, power purchase agreements, and I was able with this, some mayors with the sweep of a pen, just to decide where they buy their energy from, unfortunately, I wasn't in office long enough to have this happen, but I had signed a preliminary agreement with a company, Anageria from Canada, and they were going to fund a $5 million anaerobic digester at my sewage plant, taking it off the grid, generating all the electricity it needed, reducing the number of sewage sludge trucks that left the plant from 200 to 100. I had to pay to burn the sewage sludge. So I had a 50% reduction in the cost of sewage sludge, which I could then put toward green projects. And I was able to do that only by saying, I will buy my electricity at the market rate, whatever the rate is when my deal is up and I have to sign a new deal with you at the market rate. So there was no bidding required, nothing, with a sign of the pen. So there's a lot of ways. And unfortunately, a lot of mayors, I have to say, maybe a little reticent to do that. You have to have a little courage. You have to go out on the limb and say, I'm doing this because, and everybody will follow you because you're saving money. That's what it's all about.
This is long-term thinking as well, right? So many of these virtual PPAs are 10, 15 years, so it takes some commitment. Right. But you're right, it saves money. It makes that commitment for new energy to be built. And then you draw all your funds from saving lots of energy on energy efficiency projects, right? So in the meantime,
we need more mayors like Buddy Dyer. That's what we need.
let me go. Yeah, I've got another question here, actually, Chris. This is a great one for you. It says, you spoke to equity in your opening remarks, how Greenworks is impacting emissions as well as creating a more equitable community. Is your plan specifically addressing public housing? That's the question.
So yes, we have a plan for regional public affordable housing here within the city, and we work in collaboration with our county government and other regional governments locally, as well as place-based foundation and the private sector, to quite frankly try to drive more affordable housing within Orlando. A couple of different ways in which we are trying to get to the equity component. First and foremost, similar to Mayor Bloomberg, we're under the impression that you can't manage what you don't measure. And we've been very focused on trying to identify parts of our community where we see inequities blatantly. We have actually done a full-scale equity map with a firm called Greenworks Analytics. They just came out with a new equity map for cities around the country. Looks at various indicators for equity. And if you go to equitymap.org, you'll see more information. But we've mapped out the city from a housing standpoint, food insecurity, transportation modes, as well as energy burden. And we've identified that energy burden is one of the biggest challenges that our families are facing now during COVID. The disproportionate impact that they're spending on high utility bills in low-income pockets of our community. So we've done a couple things. One is we have worked with our utility to develop a program called Efficiency Delivered, and it essentially provides free home energy assessments for homeowners and renters. That's the important thing. And in addition, up to $2,500 of on-bill financed energy efficiency and weatherization improvements. Now that $2,500 is subsidized based on household income. So those under a $40,000 per year household income are being subsidized up to 85% of that $2,500, therefore really using the savings to pay incrementally back over time. I talked about SELF, the nonprofit that we've partnered with to also enable capital, low and sometimes no interest loans to homeowners looking to make roof repairs, change out hot water heaters and appliances, and even add solar. And then the last thing I'll say from a housing perspective is one of the climate vulnerabilities and risks that we've identified in Orlando is something that's unconventional, and that is climate migration. We are a city that will accept a number of environmental and climate refugees between now and the end of this century. There are studies that show that between 400,000 and 500,000 new residents will move directly because of impacts of climate or some type of environmental issue. And so we're starting to think early on about what that means and how do we prepare for that. We've partnered with the University of Central Florida, and we've developed a Urban Resilience Initiative, a URI, that's starting to uncover, a framework and kind of, an overall template of what to think about. And housing has continued to come to the top. Obviously, we have to house that many people. Orlando is a sprawled community over the last 100 years. That's how it's been planned. And one way we're getting to it is now we've enabled accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, for all residential zoning districts throughout the city. Quite a progressive policy from a land development perspective, but the idea is to help densify, provide affordable housing and additional revenue stream for homeowners, and help to boost up our local main streets and community, urban villages that we have by densifying those neighborhoods. So that's one way we're thinking about it. We're also thinking about it on the food system side and trying to enable all types of urban agriculture and primarily in those food desert areas, turning vacant city land into urban ag. And we've now partnered with nonprofits to activate those parcels. We've enabled backyard chickens, urban apiaries, and even front yard farming. You can have up to 60% of your front lawn as an edible landscape in Orlando. Fruit trees, permaculture, in-ground raised beds, you name it. So these are some of the things we're trying to get to the equity component. We realize, first and foremost, we have to map out where are the problems and then start to strategically identify programs that can begin addressing affordability, food insecurity, energy burden, transportation issues, and the like.
Chris, I think
for any community that hasn't done a sustainability plan, Martin, they need to have a three-way partnership: the business community, the city government, and the community at large, especially the EJ community. We had the EJ community involved from the very beginning. It made a world of difference between people buying in or people fighting something they didn't understand that they weren't a part of.
I mean, firstly, Chris, I think it's remarkable that you're already thinking about climate refugees and how to handle them. Bill, are we at risk of leaving people behind as we move forward?
Well, in Connecticut, we've always left people behind. I'm sad to say. We're two states. We're a state of the haves and the have-nots, and the 7 cities in Connecticut house most of the poverty and most of the problems of society, and the suburbs are well off and their schools are doing fine. But if you look at Connecticut nationally, that doesn't rank as high as it should, because the cities bring down the school performance numbers. In America, by and large, there's a lot of that going on. Social indicators are not getting better. The concentration of wealth in the country is getting into the hands of fewer and fewer people. We don't educate people as to the values of redistribution of wealth, which I think it's a whole other subject, but it really bears on the ability for local government to have the funds it needs and to have the population it needs to succeed. So I think it's a big social equity question you're asking, Martin. We have always prided ourselves in lifting people up. I think we've done a worse and worse job of that over the last 20 years or so. I think the Affordable Care Act has helped a little bit because those people were spending so much of their income or the emergency room's income on healthcare. So, when we're looking at working class people, we're talking about people, maybe two incomes at $50,000 a year in many cases in Bridgeport. And they have higher property taxes in the city, lower in the suburbs, poorer schools in the city, better schools in the suburbs. We've got to do a better job. I think my motivation of being mayor was to make Bridgeport the best it could be for the people who lived here. And we did that. And it was almost all working class and poor in the city. And they got a better quality of life. They got more parks. They got better schools for a short period of time. I mean, unfortunately, your terms of office are only so long. But everybody has to do what they can to try to undo the social inequities that are in Connecticut and in Florida, maybe even worse in Florida. So, we've got our work cut out for us. I think the whole Black Lives Matter, whatever you feel about that, has raised people's consciousness as to these two countries that we have, these two Americas, these two Connecticut's, and we got to bring people together. And COVID and these other struggles show our commonality of mankind and womankind. It shows us we're all in this together. We all breathe the same air. We all, swim in the same waters, and we all eat food from the earth. And we've got to do a better job of caring for each other.
I like that.
And one just quick addition there. I think the way that we make sure we don't leave people behind is we invest in the capacity within our governments to ensure that that doesn't happen. And one way that we're doing that is we are hiring for the first time a chief equity officer. Actually, it's posted right now on the city's jobs portal if anybody is interested. But we're really prioritizing it. The way that they invested in me to come into the city and build a team and start focusing on prioritizing sustainability and climate action is the same way we want to invest in our equity official and ensuring that that's part of the lens in bringing forward any policy or program or investment, right? And so we need to make sure that we build that capacity and we take ownership of that.
Very good, very good. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask you're allowed 2 sentences, both of you, to answer this final question. It's I know we've spoken briefly of COVID. How can energy efficiency play a role in COVID recovery in cities? So you got a couple of. Chris, why don't you go first?
Sure. Well, I know a lot of the conversation has been that we may be, kind of compromising our efficiency because we have to have enhanced ventilation or the like. But I do think that still, when it comes down to it, we're looking at things from an energy use intensity standpoint. And I think that there is still an important economic case to be made, as well as a public health case to be made to improve the efficiency of our buildings. It improves not only the energy and the cost, but it improves the indoor environmental quality and therefore the health of those that are living and working in these facilities.
Super. Bill, 2 sentences.
We're dependent on clean air, and we're dependent on each other. And if we focus on those 2 things, we'll have a higher quality of life.
Ah, fabulous. Wonderful. I don't know where an hour went. It's just disappeared. I would like to add, commend both of you for your solar installations on your homes. I'd just like you to know my home is entirely electric with an air source heat pump on a green tariff. So I have no fossil fuels in my house whatsoever.
Right.
So just to join your club. But it does just remain. Pictures. It does just remain for me to extend my thanks to 2 very dedicated and very driven professionals. I'd also like to thank the Alliance to Save Energy. It's an incredible organization which utilizes the brainpower of over 50 organizations looking to save energy, and it uses those findings to drive really world-leading policy. So if you're interested in becoming a member, please get in contact with me or them directly. But that just leaves me to say thank you both very much indeed. Have a great day.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening.